Yo, what is up guys, Grim here, and welcome to my ultimate guide to March 7th, an ice preservation character who specializes in shielding and freezing. And of course, she's a free-to-play character, so she's available to everybody. March can be played in 3 separate ways. She can be played as a hyper-defensive support who will be replacing one of the damage dealers on your team. She can be played as a dedicated support who specializes in a shield here and there or generating skill points, or she can be played as a healing character in the event that you don't have a second one, which is going to be a lot of us when we're playing as free to play. Overall, March is going to excel in all those roles, and she can be used as you see fit. As such, she's a great character to level up and have on your account. Due to March's incredible flexibility and defensive capabilities, despite her ice typing, she can be brought to any fight. She has a freeze as well as a shield. The shield is universal, it will always be useful. The freeze is a little bit more situational but far more powerful. The only event in which you might not want to bring her in a team is probably if the enemy is immune to freeze. You can easily check this though by seeing their character stats. Overall, March is great in many situations, and we're going to be covering exactly how to build her right and play her to the maximum level. In this video, we'll be covering Eidolons, gear, trace order, as well as all the skills and the gameplay you can expect. And we'll also throw in a few teams at the end there. March's basic attack, Frigid Cold Arrow, is a single target ice damage nuke that generates her 20 energy and deals 1 break unit of ice damage. March's skill, the Power of Cuteness, consumes a skill point but also generates her 30 energy. When used on an ally, it'll give them a truly massive shield, which is incredibly powerful for her kit. In addition to that, if they're above 30% HP, based on in-game testing, they'll have roughly a 5 times greater chance to be attacked by enemies. This is incredibly powerful and very important, as when an ally is attacked, they will actually generate energy based on how hard they were hit for, and that applies through shields. So even though March is defensive, these shielding capabilities will allow you to pick an ally and grant them a bit more energy regen, essentially. March's shield also gains a few benefits from some of her traces. The Purified trace will power up March's shield and allow it to cleanse a debuff from an ally on use. Cleanses are incredibly few and far between in Star Rail and very necessary, so March having one on her kit is crazy good. The next trace, Reinforce, will extend the duration of March's shield by 1 turn, which can be nice and definitely allows a little bit more wiggle room in the event that your allies aren't taking too much damage and the shield can stay up much longer. March's ultimate, Glacial Cascade, costs 120 energy and deals an AoE ice damage nuke to all enemies on use, which will deal 2 break units of damage. After you use it, you'll regenerate 5 energy immediately. This big AoE attack also has a 50% chance to freeze all enemies hit, based on their effect hit resistance, as well as March's effect hit rate, which we'll get into in the gearing section. Overall, frozen enemies take a massive slow. They're going to be delayed substantially, and this is a massive part of why March is so powerful. Her defensive shields, combined with her defensive freezes, are really a force to be reckoned with. March's ultimate can be empowered by one of her traces. Ice Spell will increase the base chance for enemies to be frozen from 50% to 65%, which is a massive increase. March's talent, Girl Power, is a follow-up attack that triggers whenever an ally who is shielded is hit. So if an enemy targets an ally who has her shield or any shield at all and they are attacked, March's talent will trigger immediately. This talent will deal a single target ice damage nuke that deals 1 break unit of damage and also generates March 10 energy. Now the catch is this can be triggered twice per turn, so 2 enemies attack and then March has a go, well this counter will then be reset, 2 more enemies attack, then March has a go, and you can kind of see how it will go on and on and on. So building March with speed will allow her to trigger a lot more talents in a fight where enemies are also fast. In a fight where there are multiple enemies in play and they are all attacking shielded enemies, you can expect to generate 20 energy per turn from her talent. March's technique, Freezing Beauty, is an engagement type technique that has a chance to freeze 1 enemy on entrance. It'll also deal break units of damage to all enemies who are vulnerable to ice. It's a little bit on the weaker side in terms of techniques, in terms of entry techniques, so it's definitely not advisable to use this over more powerful ones, but you can use it if the enemy is weak to ice, and of course, you have no other options. March is a defensive support who wants to bring utility with her freeze, so she's not going to really be bringing a whole lot of damage to the table as she's going to be building defensive relics as well as using a defensive light cone. As such, the only trace you actually need to level up on March to bring out her full capabilities is her skill, the power of cuteness, as it scales the shielding capabilities of the ability and is really powerful. The rest of her traces can be nice to level up situationally, but really all they're going to be bringing is a tiny little bit more damage. Overall, her minor floating traces are incredibly powerful for her. Pick up the defensive ones when you can, as it will increase the shielding capabilities of March quite substantially. However, they are, of course, hidden behind some damaging nodes, so they're definitely not a priority if you need to save your resources for other characters. All of March's bonuses here are incredibly strong. To prioritize and grab Purify as soon as possible. It is essential to your progression in the story, and it should be one of the very first bonus abilities that you unlock on any character on your account. The other two bonus abilities here are also fantastic, but the best one next is going to be Ice Spell when you get to it. Secondly, you can level up Reinforce, but it's a much lower priority as the shields already have a good duration and you don't need to go crazy about really getting that extra turn. Due to the fact that March only has one skill to level up and her talents aren't too crazy expensive to unlock, she's actually a very cheap character to build, and I definitely recommend doing so. When playing March as a hyper-defensive support, the one which replaces the damage dealer, alternate between using her basic attack and skill, and then weave in the ultimate whenever it's available immediately. The goal of bringing March as a hyper-defensive support is to maintain a shield on one character with 100% uptime. You can also opt to try and spread the shield across multiple characters in the event that you want to try and really get a lot of shielding capabilities. Overall though, spending it on one character will ensure 100% uptime, and in addition to that will also increase their chance of them getting hit by the most amount. This can be good because your damaging character who you make shield will gain a lot more energy this way. In the pure supporting variant of March, you want to use as many basic attacks as possible to generate skill points for the rest of your team to work. Damage dealers need skill points, and March in the pure support role can provide them. Overall, you want to try with pure support March to maintain one shield on one ally for as long as possible. This overall is going to give her most of her benefit while also allowing her to generate the skill points your team needs. In addition to that, when playing pure support March, if there is another shielder on your team like Trailblazer Fire, she actually doesn't need to use her shield at all to unlock her full potential, and it can just be used in emergencies. The reason for this is that her talent can trigger off of any ally being hit, and not just her own shield. The pure supportive March is going to bring a lot of preservation benefits, but is primarily going to be there to provide skill points and also her freezing ultimate, which is incredibly powerful in the endgame. When playing March in place of a healer, you're going to need to proactively use your shield on many targets. The goal of healing March is going to be to try and maintain a shield on, if possible, 4 targets, but at the very minimum 2 to 3. This is going to act in place of a healer and allow you to sustain your team throughout the duration of a fight. However, March alone is going to have a lot of trouble doing this, so she's going to need to be paired with another defensive support, most likely like Trailblazer Flyer or Japard, in order to replace the healing role. However, she's fully capable of doing it, but she's going to burn up a lot more skill points than a traditional healer will because she has to use her skill pretty much every single turn. So healing March is viable, but it's going to come at the cost of a lot of skill points and damage potential. Similar to the hyper defensive build, the pure support March and the healing March wants to use her ultimate as soon as possible. Now, due to the nature of her talent and how it generates her more energy in AoE situations when allies are getting hit, overall her rotation is going to range wildly, also based on energy regeneration rate. But in general, a rule of thumb is that the pure support March is going to be able to use her ultimate roughly every 4 actions, and the more healing focused and sustain focused March will likely be able to use it every 3 actions, similar to the hyper defensive. Due to the nature of all of March's abilities, her rotation isn't really something you can map out on a piece of paper. The general gist of her is just as follows. Playing hyper defensive support, make sure that you alternate between basic and skill and use the ultimate on cooldown. As pure support, try and maintain her shield on at least one ally, but if things are getting too crazy, you may need to forego having that shield up every single turn in favor of generating skill points so your team can function. When playing her as a healer, pretty much just splash the shield around as much as you possibly can. Energy regeneration doesn't really change any of these rotations other than you're going to get the ultimate faster, and of course the more enemies that there are as well, the faster you'll get that ultimate as well. Make sure to just activate it as soon as it's available, as that will be the most important part. As mentioned earlier, March's technique isn't the most powerful one. It should only be used if it's literally your only entry technique available. But in this team I'm playing here, you can see I have Clara's entry technique available, and it is far more pivotal to my team's success here, so I'm not going to use March's, I'm going to use Clara's, as it is by far more powerful. Place March on the far left or far right of your teams. The reason for this is that she's a preservation character, and preservation characters have a higher chance to be hit by enemies. Overall, this is important as enemies have what's called cleave attacks, which will deal enemy damage in a 3-unit range. So, if for example, my Clara got hit, it would attack March as well as Bailu at the same time. But if March is on the edge and she is the target of the attack, it'll only hit March and Clara in this scenario. A cool tip is to put your main damaging character or a character you want additional energy on next to the character you think is going to get attacked most. So in the case that I wanted to shield March here, she'd have the highest chance by far to get attacked, and she's going to be the target of all cleave attacks, and all cleave attacks that hit March will also hit Clara, triggering her talent and being really powerful. Understanding who to shield and when is the most important part of playing March effectively, and it's not really too hard to understand. Whenever you see an ally who has this targeting reticle on them, as Clara does here, it means that an enemy is targeting them with a massive power-up attack. Now, fortunately for me, March has her turn before that attack is executed, so I actually have the opportunity here to shield Clara before that attack comes in. This is a great way to prevent a massive amount of damage and one of March's greatest strengths. Now in the event there's no ally getting targeted by a targeting reticle, you may also want to use March's shield to cleanse an ally who is under a debuff. This should be the next highest priority, and it will be a very big thing in the endgame. Now if no allies need cleansing and no allies have a targeting reticle on them, you probably want to default to whatever your team composition needs most in terms of the shields. When playing March as a dedicated healer, you're going to want to spread the shields out and make sure everyone has at least a little bit of a shield to make sure they don't get absolutely one-shot. When playing March as a pure support, you just want to maintain the shield on a damage dealer or maybe on March herself for a bit of a defensive measure. Now this means that you're just going to want to be using it on one target, every now and then, and trying to keep it up while also generating a ton of skill points. When playing March as a pure hyper-defensive support who is in place of a damage dealer, most likely to make up some of the damage you're losing by bringing her as a defensive unit instead of a damaging one, you're going to want to put the shield on your damaging unit, due to the fact that it'll grant them far more energy. So maintain it and keep it up for as long and as often as possible on your damaging character. In this case, it would be Clara, and it would have a massive synergy as she gets more damage the more she is hit. Of course, when March's ultimate is ready, don't forget to use it. It is by far the most important thing that you use it immediately after it is available, as her counterattacks will happen frequently and whenever the enemy attacks. So you don't want to waste any energy, make sure you get that ultimate out ASAP so that all the counterattacks that are ever used will of course generate you tons of energy, giving you way more ults in the course of a fight there. Very, very important to get that down. Alright, now that we understand March's combat potential, let's get into gearing her up and cover her light tones and relics. So all the preservation light tones are pretty close in their capabilities, but let's cover the ones which are considered probably the best for March. First and foremost, what is March looking for? Well, she's a supporting preservation character who would prefer to give her shield to another ally to increase their threat and make them the target of attack so that they can gain energy and really enhance their rotation, or in the case of Clara, do a lot more damage. So she doesn't want to tank herself. Unless you really want to put her in that role yourself, you can kind of consider that and move in that direction. But for the most part, I believe March wants to give the tanking role to someone else. So when we're looking at her light tones, we want to consider that. So first and foremost, the best free-to-play option for March, in my opinion, is We Are Wildfire. It's going to give the entire team a damage reduction buff for 5 turns, which is really, really good. It's definitely nice. The only downside is it doesn't scale March's defense at all, but it does have some pretty good base stats, and it's completely free-to-play, and you will be able to get it to super position 5 as a free-to-play player, given enough time. The next best option is a strict upgrade over We Are Wildfire, and that is Day 1 of My New Life. It's a signature light tone, and it comes from the gacha. It's going to increase her defense by 16%, but also give that same damage reduction buff there permanently. So that's going to be a big boon and really nice for your team. And this is what I would consider her best in slot. And this is the one I'm personally going to be trying to get on my March and trying to get it at a reasonable superimposition level. Now, if you're looking for just strict defense scaling and you don't have Day 1 of My New Life, you can also use Trend of the Universal Market and This Is Me. They both provide defense increases as well as a bit of an offensive bonus. Now, if you do end up investing in Texture of Memories, I don't think it's the best on March, as it's not going to be what you're exactly looking for on the character. You probably want to use this on a character that wants to be dedicated to getting hit, like Trailblazer Fire, so I wouldn't use this one on March personally. Now, the 2 remaining Preservation Light Cones actually increase the taunt or threat of March herself, meaning she will have a higher chance to be attacked, which kind of conflicts with her objective of giving that roll to somebody else so that they can get more energy regeneration or trigger their rotation easier. So overall, I would not recommend using Lando's Choice or Moment of Victory. Moment of Victory has some very nice stats on it. It gives effect hit rate and defense, but the downside of giving the March increased taunt can be a little bit annoying unless you want to specifically build the team around that. So the priority is going to be We Are Wildfire for free to play and Day 1 of My New Life if you can end up getting it. Get a bit of defense from these other 2, but that's probably where I would go. Next, let's cover March's best in slot relic stats next. On the helmet and hands, as normal, you're going to get HP and attack. You don't get a choice. But on the boots, you're definitely going to want speed. It is pretty much the best in slot by a massive margin. Absolutely pick that up as the main stat. On the body armor, you have the choice between effect hit rate and defense. If you want to scale the freeze up and make sure that it hits more often, scale effect hit rate. If you want to scale her shields, use defense. I prefer effect hit rate as it is a big part of her kit. Next up on the planar sphere, grab defense. It's the only good option for March. On the link rope, grab either defense or energy recharge rate. It's a bit of a tough decision, but overall, if you want to value more shields, go for defense. If you want to get more freezes, go for energy regen rate. Depending on how many enemies are in the fight, as well as overall the situation that's on offer, energy regen rope can actually give you a ton more ultimates, and overall that can be pretty good, but it's going to be down to you guys to decide. Both of them are fine, and both of them are viable options. As with all characters, the main stats are the most important, so use rainbow sets and mix and match items to get all of the primary stats that you need right, and then move on to getting set bonuses later. Fortunately for March, her best in slot set is very easy to farm, and it's actually the Knight of Purity Palace. Getting a 4-piece Knight of Purity Palace will massively increase her shooting potential, and it should definitely be a priority if you plan on using March. Overall, this is the only set which really should be considered for her, as it is just way better than everything else. It's also given to you in pieces throughout the story, so you should be able to get it online pretty easily. Additionally, it's also in one of the most stamina efficient domains to run, so it's actually pretty good. Alternatively, if you do have a very good set of Musketeer of Wildwheat with all the stats March needs, she can also use this for the increased speed, but just know that it's nowhere near as good as the Knight of Purity Palace. For planar ornaments, March has 2 options. She can use the Fleet of the Ageless as a really easy to farm option, which is going to increase the attack of your entire team. For a more offensive option, this is great, but she can also use a way more defensive option in Belobog of Architects here to gain a substantial more amount of defense to really boost up her shielding capabilities. Overall, for shielding and defense, Belobog of Architects. For offense, Fleet of the Ageless. Note that Fleet of the Ageless will be much easier to acquire. The substats you're looking for on March are as follows. The best and most important is always for support going to be speed. Pick it up wherever and however you can on your substats, as long as it's on set and with your primary stats. Next up, it's a tie between defense and effect hit rate. If you want to scale the shields, go for defense substats. If you want to scale the chance for you to freeze, go for effect hit rate. Overall, many enemies have effect hit resistance, so getting more and more effect hit rate is never a bad thing, and you almost can't have enough of it, and overall, it's just going to make March more consistent. So, speed as the priority, defense for bigger shields, effect hit rate for better freezes. Lastly, let's cover March's Eidolons, as well as how she fits into different team compositions. Her first Eidolon here, Memory of You, is going to increase her regeneration rate after she uses her ultimate. So normally, the ultimate only regenerates 5, but for every enemy she freezes, she will also gain an additional 6 energy. It's worth noting that this is modified by the energy regeneration rope, so this can create truly crazy situations where you can gain access to the ultimate far faster than you're used to. Depending on how many enemies you are freezing, she will get many more ultimates. It's a great Eidolon to pick up, especially for free-to-play players. It's going to improve March significantly. Number 2, Memory of It, is going to provide you a shield on the battle entry. This can be great for free-to-play players who don't have a second healer for Forgotten Hall. It's definitely going to boost your viability and durability in the second team, where you're likely going to be running 2 shielders. The fourth Eidolon, don't want to lose it here, is going to increase her counter by 1, so she's going to go from having 2 counters at her disposal to 3. In AoE fights or multi-target or multi-hitting single target enemies, this can be great. It'll massively improve her energy regeneration, and combining it with Eidolon 1, she's going to be getting way more ultimates over the course of a fight than in a Eidolon 0 situation. A great Eidolon to have at your disposal. Finally, just like this, Always is going to give you a bit of a healing component to March's shield. This is definitely not not the most insane Eidolon, but it will provide you a nice little bonus, especially if you're one of those free-to-play players who only are using 2 shielders on one of your Forgotten Hall teams. It's not the best Eidolon, but it's definitely not bad, and you'll be happy to get it when you do get it. Overall, March is fully functional without any of her Eidolons, and they're just going to contribute to giving her more shielding capabilities as well as more consistent and more frequent freezes. Alright, finally to round it off, let's take a look at some sample March teams and understand how she fits into these teams and what she's bringing to the table. The first team here is using March as a hyper defensive support. So the team structure here is as follows. We've got our main damage character here, Dan Heng, who's going to be dealing all the damage. He's being played as a main carry here. We got Natasha bringing the heals. She's going to be doing a good job of that. We got Bronya as the dedicated support, basically being the skill point generator for this team. And we have March here, who's going to be played as a neutral hyper defensive support here, who's going to alternate between using her basic and skill. The way this is going to play out is as follows. Bronya is going to exclusively be spamming her basic attack unless you overcap on skill points, in which she'll use her skill, and all of these skill points are going to be funneled into Dan Heng into damage. He's going to be dealing all the damage to the team, and he's going to be doing a good job of it. Natasha is going to be using basic attacks as well as heals with her own skill points, and then finally March is going to be using basic attacks as well as alternating between shielding, really providing Dan as many shields as she possibly can. You know, you can shield other people, but you'd prefer to just shield Dan, as if you shield Dan, he's going to be the target of most of the attacks here, and he will then receive all of the damage, and as a result, all of the energy gained with it, meaning he'll deal much more damage, and he will overall be a better carry and be able to provide many more ultimates. The next team we have here has March as a healer. Now, many free-to-play players are going to see themselves using this team. Trailblazer Fire here is going to be the primary support, March is the healer, and we've got 2 damaging dealers. Now, when using March as a healer, you're essentially going to have to use her skill every single turn. Trailblazer Fire is going to be generating the skill points for her to do so, so she's going to be using all the skill points that Trailblazer Fire generates. And what she's going to do with those skill points is she's going to be placing a shield on everyone, alternating, making sure that everyone has at least some amount of shielding on them at all times. Obviously prioritize your lowest health party members first, but this is the way it's going to play out. Now, as these two are basically completely using each other's skill points that they generate, the last 2 characters here are going to be needing to be pretty self-sufficient. So you want characters who are okay not spamming their skill every turn. Serval is a great character who can go skill basic because a lot of her damage is from dots and her basic attacks are really strong. Dan Heng also has bonuses to his basic attacks, and his rotation actually suits using basic skill quite nicely. So these characters are great accompaniments to this setup here, and both of them are going to be great played as neutral characters here. Our last team here is going to be similar to the last one we talked about, but it's got March here as the skill point generator and dedicated support. Her role here is of course to provide skill points for Dan Heng and Serval to use, and overall she's going to be a pretty good character for that. In addition to that, she can also rarely use her shield. Try and keep it up on either Serval or Dan Heng, one or the other. Just keep it so it's not necessarily fully topped up, but it's just present so that it can taunt them and it can trigger her talent so she gets more ultimates. But remember, her main role here is to basic attack as many times as possible, as well as trigger as many ultimates to freeze as possible. Overall, she's a great defensive support, but she's not so good that you'd use her over Trailblazer Fire. In this role, it's only someone you would use if you have Trailblazer Fire on your other team. She's primarily good as a hyper defensive support or a healing unit, and those are the roles I'd play her in. She's not a bad support, but I think she'll get much more powerful if we ever see a damaging character come out who can provide shields, as that will solve a lot of her issues, and then she can just use basic attacks instead of having to use her skill, which in this scenario she will have to use her skill occasionally, losing a little bit of her skill point generating capabilities. But this team will work out as follows. Dan Heng and Serval will use their skills as much as you're comfortable with. March will be generating the skill points and using her shield very rarely just to maintain it, and Natasha will be using her heals as needed. Overall, March is an absolutely fantastic defensive support. She brings a lot to the table in her shields as well as her ultimate, and she's free to play to boot. She has great Eidolons, which aren't necessary but will massively boost her capabilities, and they're also pretty easy to get as free to play. She's a really good character to level up and have on your account, and I think she's going to see a lot of use throughout the game's history. Overall, I hope you guys enjoyed my March 7th guide, and if you learned something new, I hope you'll consider subscribing. It would really help me out. Until next time, cheers.